Tonight, I want us to really consider whether or not denominations help or hurt the call to evangelize the world. Does Christian denominations, does it help or does it hurt the call to evangelize the world? I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts tonight? What do you think? Are we better because we have more denominations, or are we worse? And if you think we're worse, I would love for you to tell me, why do you feel we're worse?
Well, speaking the truth of Jesus Christ.
Right.
That hurts some people that can't get
The real thing.
Right.
So you're saying
they're giving the truth is good.
it's good.
It's not. It hurts some people that listening to it and not getting the truth.
Okay, good. Very good answer. Okay.
Everybody that knows they think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have people sort of that believe in that.
Right.
And, you have to believe in Jesus Christ.
Right.
And, and what he said.
That's right.
And, what the gospel.
Okay, good. So you got to believe in the gospel. You got to believe that what he says is right. All right. Go ahead. Are you going? I was going to ask. There's projected 40,000 denominations in Christianity. Do y'all think half of those 40,000, 10% of those 40,000, 50, 40, 80, 90% of those 40,000 are actually representing Jesus Christ well? What do y'all think?
Maybe half of them.
Maybe half. Okay.
Right.
Definitely not all of them, right? We know not all of them, right? It's only one gospel. Yeah, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, all of these denominations are not speaking the same thing. So we know already we have a fundamental issue because, as you stated, Paul stated there's only one gospel. Not everyone is preaching the same gospel. So we know we already have an issue. We have a problem. I'm going to read. The reason I'm studying this, and this came to mind. The reason we're studying this tonight is because I came across a book written in 1922, and it was a godsend, really, because I went on a trip one day. I can't remember where I was. I don't know where I was, but I came back from the trip asking the question, why are certain people attracted to certain denominations? That's the question that was in my mind. And so I called my philosophy professor on campus, and I said, hey, Doc, I got a question for you. Have you ever come across a book anywhere that described the phenomena that is related to why certain people go to certain denominations? Why are certain people Presbyterian? Why are certain apostolic? Why are certain people Baptist? What's the thing, the commonality there? Is there any research on it that describes it? And he said, not to my knowledge, but that's a great question. I said, all right, fine. So I contacted my psychology professor on campus. I said, hey, are there any social studies that you are aware of that describes why certain people pick certain denominations? And she said, no, I don't know. I don't know of any. I can't find any. So I just assumed that no one had an answer or interest in it. The only thing I came close to was a psychological analysis of why people speak in tongues. And it was very interesting to see the things that this study revealed about people who speak in tongue and the experience and the psychological implications of what's happening during that experience. It was very fascinating, but it wasn't the answer to the question that I had. And randomly, I wasn't even looking for it, I came across this book that was entitled The Social Sources of Denominationalism by a man by the name of H. Richard Heber, written in 1922, which it makes it 101 years old right now. And in this book, he went through and he conducted a historical analysis of Christian denominations, from your Baptist, your Anabaptist, your Methodist, your Presbyterian, your Quakers, Puritans. I mean, he went through it all and started naming out the distinctions between different denominations. But one thing that he stated there, and I'm going to read a little bit of it from his book in just a moment, but one of the things that caught my attention was the point that he made about how denominations break up certain people into certain categories. For instance, there are namely 3, maybe 4 different things that define a Christian denomination. The first is race. The second is economics. The third is cultural background. And then the other is social classes. All right, think about this. Most people say we are broken up by denominations because we believe differently about the Bible. So if you're a Baptist, you believe that I need to be separate from the Methodists because we have a certain view of baptism. Or if you're a Pentecostal, you will say, I need to be separate from the Baptists because I have a certain view of the Holy Spirit that causes me to want to be separate from everyone else. Well, some of that may be true. I don't buy all of it because, now you got Baptists coming to Presbyterian churches, and you have Presbyterians going to Baptist churches, and you have Pentecostals going to Methodist churches. You have oneness believers going to Trinitarian believers churches and preaching, and no one has an issue with it. But yet, on Sunday morning, we're still in our own churches. Why? It's because at the bottom, at the foundation of these denominations, it's not necessarily a biblical or theological issue. It is more so a cultural, societal, economic, or even a race issue. I want you to do something. After I read this book, I started looking around. I want you to do something. Think of every denomination you can think of, whether it's Baptist, whether it is whatever, Presbyterian, Methodist, whatever. And see if you can find any one of these denominations that focuses in on diversity of people. Meaning we got people of all social classes. We have people of all economic classes. We have people of all races. We have people of all, catch this one, ages. Meaning there's some older people. There's some younger people. There's some middle-aged people. See if you can find a denomination that makes everyone feel like they have a place in the church. And I would argue that most times, probably 9 times out of 10, you will find it very hard to find a denomination that makes every person feel like they belong in that denomination. It is because most times denominations are built on things that are supposed to supposed to divide, keep people apart. And the gospel is intent on bringing people together. So if I had to answer the question, is Christian denominations helping us? Well, in some ways, perhaps so. If we mean by helping us, do I feel comfortable at the church that I go to? Do I like the songs that are being sung? Do I like the style of preaching? Do I feel like I have a place where I belong? Well, yes. In that regard, it is helping us because guess what? I'm around people that are from where I'm from, right? We're all black. We all make the same amount of money relatively. We all tend to like a certain style of music. Well, yes, it's like I'm sitting in my living room. But the question is not whether or not denominations make me feel better. The question is, are denominations helpful to our responsibility to evangelize the world? And if I'm answering that question, I would say it is not. Because evangelism is not about making us feel comfortable in our living room. It's about taking our living room to the world so that they can understand how God has made a home for all of us of various backgrounds and from various places. I want to read this quote from The Social Sources of Denominationalism. And I think it'll bring some clarity to you what I'm saying tonight. And then we'll look in scripture and see how these things are played out. It says denominationalism in the Christian church is such an unacknowledged hypocrisy. It is a compromise made far too lightly between Christianity and the world. Yet it often regards itself, catch this, as a Christian achievement, and it glorifies its martyrs as bearers of the cross. So you have Methodists that it celebrates its martyrs. You have Roman Catholics. They celebrate their martyrs for dying for the Roman Catholic Church, and they even call them saints, right? Greek Orthodox, they say we have our saints. These are the people who died for our cause, and we're celebrating them because they were the best of the Greek Orthodox Church or the best of the Roman Catholic Church or the best of the Apostolic Church. We celebrate it and we glorify these efforts. But what he argues here is that it is actually, in many respects, it's a very tough word. He says it's hypocritical. He goes on to say it represents, that is Christian denominationalism, it represents the accommodation, catch this, of Christianity to the caste system of human society. So what he's saying is the world has built a system that separates us, right? Even look in your neighborhood. Most people are in a neighborhood where everyone makes the same amount of money. That's why we say you live on one side of the track and I live on the other side of the track. And when we come together, we say we're from two different sides of the what? Of the track. That's a system. That's not accidental. That's not a preference. It's a system. The world has a system that separates us based on these kinds of variables. How much money do you make? Where do you go to school? Where did you graduate? What color are you? What's your level of education? How much money did you make this year? How much money will you make next year? What family do you belong to? These are things that the world divides. It's a caste system, if you will. He says that denominationalism, it carries over into the organization of the Christian principle of brotherhood, the prides, the prejudices, the privilege, and the prestige, as well as the humiliations and the abasements, the injustices, and the inequalities of that specious order of high and low wherein men find the satisfaction of their craving for vain glory. In other words, people come to church and they don't feel like they're equal. They often feel embarrassed and humiliated. I remember when I first started preaching, I was preaching at a church one time, and this is when, for some reason, the Lord was really dealing with me on how vain it is to trust in riches. And I remember, not intentionally, but it just so happened that everywhere I went, I would often say in my messages, it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive and how much money you have in your bank account and what your clothes look like. What matters is your relationship with Jesus Christ. And I remember the cold stares I would get from the congregation, particularly in this one church that I was preaching in, where people were pretty well off. They were making very good money. And I remember the coldness of the environment whenever I said that, because truthfully, if they didn't know it, I knew it. They put their trust in their wealth. And it made me realize, even to this day, how many people, when they come to church, come to Christianity, how humiliated they feel because they feel they don't fit in with other people. They look around and they realize they don't drive the same cars that their other brothers and sisters are driving. Or maybe their clothes are not as well refined, or maybe their clothes are well worn in comparison to the other people in the room, and they feel like they're living beneath the status quo. Maybe some people had to walk to church instead of drive. Maybe some people had to catch a taxi instead of, pulling up in one of their nice shiny cars. Maybe some people are going home to live with a relative rather than going to a home that they purchased with cash. These are things we take pride in the world, but what we're realizing is this is what we're taking pride in now in the church. This is why the prosperity gospel is so dangerous, because it makes us put certain ideas out there that will make other people feel as though they don't belong in the Christian community. Right? That's the issue that we're facing. Christian denominationalism invites those variables into the church and says, let's build our identity on those things. Now, we never say this, but I want you to look around at all the churches and see what we're dealing with. So you might have have you ever gone to a town and they're known as being the church with a lot of people with a lot of money? Certain figures go to the church. Certain key figures in the community. It might be the, just so we won't make it so specific. Let's say we're living in D.C. Oh, the president goes to this church. Well, who doesn't want to go to the church with the president, right? So everybody who goes to that church, they feel like they're somebody, but the people who have 10 people over there, they feel like there's nobody, they're nobodies. We're just going to not pay any attention to them. This is what denominationalism does. It's not built on theology as we would hope that it would be built on. It's built on things that bring us, as the author says here, vain glory. He says the division of the churches closely follows the division of men into the caste of, catch this, national, race, and economic groups. It draws the color line in the church of God. So you see, we have black churches, white churches, Hispanic churches, Latino churches, Chinese churches, American churches, churches in Germany, Armenian churches, Ethiopia. We have these different ideas. Is this a matter of theology or biblical differences? Or is it a matter of preference? Here's my question to us tonight. How much does your preference matter to your responsibility to win somebody that does not look like you? Are you willing to take your preference and say, you know what? Let me put this to the side. Some people don't feel like they have church unless they get a good jump in or a good run around the building, or unless the preacher is, screaming and hollering and the organ is behind them. They don't feel like the guy preached. Understand that style is simply our preference. But how many of us know tonight that we have not been called to win those who are like us only? We've been called to win people who may not like our style. And this is why I believe it's so important for us to remember what Paul said. Paul says, I became all things to all men that I might do what? Win some. You know what that means? That means whenever Paul went to someone that liked CCM music, you know what he got? He got his acoustic guitar out there and he started rocking and rolling and he started singing the music that was comfortable to them so that they can hear the gospel. When he went to a church or someplace, when they wanted to hear some good James Cleveland, guess what he did? He pulled out his B3 organ and he started going. I'm just putting in our day, like, y'all understand what I'm saying? He made himself accessible to all people so that the gospel can be applicable to anyone, anywhere, from any background. That's not what denominationalism does. By definition, denominationalism is separation. It's like what you do with your dollars. You divide it. So you have a $1 bill, a $5 bill, a $10 bill, a $20 bill, a $100 bill. And if I were to ask you tonight, which one would you want, a $100 bill or a $1 bill? Which one would you say? $100. Without, even my kids over there said $100 without hesitation. And that's how we do churches. If you could have a black church or a white church, which one would you want? And we choose it based on our what? Our preference. I'm going to show you tonight that God did not call us. Well, it's nothing wrong with being in your own community. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that should not ever take precedence over your responsibility to reach somebody else. I'm going to say this. I said this to someone when I was about 12 years old. I asked someone this question. I said, why is our church full of only black people? And then I asked them, why is the church downtown only filled with white people? I asked them that. And the answer that I received from the person at that time was, that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. Now, let me just say this. It's a little more difficult than that. Race is often determined by demographics, or should I say, geographic location. When you are in a rural city that has a predominantly high population of any one race, your church is going to be predominantly whatever that race is in that particular area. If we have a city that's highly populated with black people or white people, well, your churches are going to reflect that. That's not the issue. The issue is our churches fail to look like the places we reside in. So you might have a metropolitan area with a 30-30-30 split, or 33-33-33 split. And the churches all look like 100% one, 100% one thing, 100% other. There's no diversity to reflect the city that we're in. And that's where the denominationalism becomes an issue. Because again, it's not based on a theological issue. It's based on a social, economic, racial, on some sort of cultural issue that is supposed to be pushed aside through the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you want to find peace, preach the gospel. If you want to see people come together, preach the gospel. If you want to see people live in community in a way we've never seen and never been able to capture in the world, preach the gospel. I've read several of Martin Luther King's books. And I can tell you, we have not, well, I say books, speeches. And I'm going to tell you this, we have not even tipped the iceberg to what he envisioned we could be. Not even close. Not after all the people that have been hosed down in the streets. Not after all the people who have been chased down the road with dogs. All the hundreds of thousands of people who have been placed in the jail. How about all those people that resisted peacefully and got smacked across their face? Some people got battered across their head with bottles, beat with billy clubs. After all of that, we still haven't gotten it. How do we find, how do we develop, how do we have universal harmony? We have it through the gospel. That's the answer right here. And this is why we're talking about denominationalism tonight. It is a harm to the work that God has called us to.